Boston in late spring smells like rain promising to arrive on time. The afternoon of my son's birthday party, the wind came off the harbor and carried a coolness that settled on bare arms and paper tablecloths. We had rented the Bright Room at the Children's Museum because that is what 5-year-olds remember. Colors, noise, cake as tall as a story. I had stacked favors in neat rows and set out crayons and taped a banner so straight it could have been measured with a surveyor pole. My sister Bianca showed up late in a dress that wanted cameras. She hugged my mother like a winner. She touched my husband's elbow like a secret. She smiled at me like a coin flipped in the air. I kept moving. A party is a small supply chain, and my body knows how to keep boxes moving. Strawberries in bowls, cups near the water cooler, napkins lining up like soldiers who plan to be kind. Gabe moved through the room with the smoothness of a man who never hits the same furniture twice. He greeted parents from school and joked about the parking and lifted our son so he could reach a hanging model of a whale. For a moment, the day felt almost normal. Then Bianca tapped a spoon to a glass and turned the room into a stage she believed belonged to her. She did not wait for quiet. She raised her chin and announced that she had news. I watched heads turn. I watched my mother's hand cover her mouth in a practiced gesture of shock. Bianca let the room ripen, and then she placed a palm on her stomach with an ease that suggested rehearsal. She glowed the way actors glow when the light has been arranged to forgive them. She told the room she was expecting. She turned and looked at Gabe in a way that made time split open. There was a murmur that sounded like a crowd trying to decide if it had misheard. Someone clapped by accident and then stopped. I held the knife for the cake and considered its weight as if steel could measure what dignity costs. I cued the music. I stepped forward and held aside the curtain that leads to the next activity station. I invited children to race toy boats in the water table. I told our son to make a wish, and he took the instructions seriously, as children do. The room returned to kid volume for a full minute. Bianca waited near the door like a headliner who had just delivered the opening shock and now needed a second act. I recognized the shape of the plan because I had seen it from her since we were small. She liked to throw a match and then sit where the light made her beautiful. I did not pull her aside to hiss. I did not demand explanations. I have learned that silence can be a scalpel when used by a steady hand. I watched our mother's eyes dart between Bianca and Gabe, watched her face arrange itself into a mask of worry that tasted like performance. Gabe looked like a man walking across ice that may or may not hold. He busied himself with plates and candy and refilling juice. He did not meet my eyes. That was a choice, and it helped me make mine. 2 weeks before the party, a letter had arrived from the urologist who had treated Gabe for a temporary condition. The letter was short and filled with numbers and dates, and a sentence that said the likelihood of conception during the numbered window was exceedingly low. Gabe had mentioned the appointment in passing during a month when sleep and work were winning against conversation. He had ignored the follow-up because ignoring is easier than admitting that a body can be stubborn. I had opened the letter because I handle our household paperwork. I had placed it in a folder because instinct told me to keep it safe. I had added it to a timeline I keep for our family that contains immunizations and school deadlines and anything a judge would consider real. I am not superstitious, and I am not naive. I am an operations coordinator who has learned that order is the quietest form of power. At the party, I kept my mind on checklists: candle, song, wish, knife, plates. I cut the cake and distributed slices with calm wrists. I thanked people for the gifts with a voice that did not crack. I smiled at Bianca and told her congratulations, and made my tone so even that even she could not hear the blade inside. She looked at me with a heat meant for a different audience and told me she hoped I could be happy for her. I told her we would speak as a family after the party. I felt every parent in the room pretend not to listen. The children lost interest in adult weather and drifted toward paint and blocks, and a table where a museum guide showed them how magnets speak to metal. I took pictures of my son smiling with frosting across his lip. I cataloged the details a judge would need if this story required a courtroom someday. Time-stamped receipts for the room, rental, and cake, a list of attendees, security camera angles in the hallway that could have captured conversations. I do this not because I love conflict, but because I know what chaos can cost if it is allowed to bill by the hour. When the last child left with a helium balloon and a gift bag filled with small plastic hope, I gathered plates and sealed trash and checked under chairs for lost sweaters. I told my mother we would meet at my house in 1 hour. She nodded as if she had been waiting years for me to make the wrong move, and this would be it. Bianca wrapped an arm around Gabe as we walked out, a gesture that would look like comfort to a photographer who did not care about context. I unlocked the car and strapped my son into his seat, and he told me that his wish had been about a dinosaur visiting our house. I told him that could still happen and buckled him in, tighter than fear. At home, I set out water and not wine. I placed chairs so that no one could sit too close to anyone else. I put the letter from the urologist into a plain manila envelope and added copies of a hotel receipt Bianca had forgotten at my house. After a weekend she had claimed to spend helping a friend move. The receipt belonged to a property in a town 2 hours away. The date landed inside the conception window Bianca later implied when she touched her stomach at my son's party. That same weekend, my neighbor had sent me a clip from her doorbell camera of a woman who looked like my sister walking up the block at an hour when only raccoons and secrets enjoy the streets. The light was poor, but the walk was hers. I added a still frame from that clip to the envelope and labeled it with only the date. I did not write conclusions. I respect the intelligence of an audience, even when that audience is a court or a mother who prefers fiction. They arrived on time, like people reporting for a performance review. Bianca took the chair near the window where the light softened her edges. Gabe sat across from me and examined the water glass as if hydration required study. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa like a referee in a league that does not recognize rules but enjoys the shirt. I started by thanking them for coming. I stated the facts as I understood them. Bianca had announced a pregnancy at my son's birthday. She had looked at my husband when she made the announcement. That gesture had been noted by other people who were present. I asked if anyone wanted to clarify intentions before I responded. Bianca spoke first and used a tone she had honed since adolescence, for moments when she decides to be both victim and judge. She said accidents happen and people grow apart, and souls find their people at inconvenient times. She said secrecy would be cruel. She said I have always been a planner, and planners hate nature when it refuses to be scheduled. She said I should accept that this was a blessing. Gabe said nothing. My mother's eyes were wet in the way that suggests performance more than relief. She asked me to be sensible for the sake of the family. She asked me not to embarrass anyone. The sentence carried an old stain the family had learned to forget existed. I placed the envelope on the coffee table without drama. I told them it contained information relevant to any claim Bianca or Gabe intended to make in the story of how this child arrived. I told them it included a letter from a doctor describing the narrowness of a window. I told them it included a receipt that placed Bianca in a hotel during the weekend she now suggests had changed her life. I told them it included a still frame of her arriving home very early that morning. I told them we would pursue a court-supervised process for paternity and for the protection of marital assets. I told them Gabe should arrange to sleep elsewhere that night. I told them that our child would be with me and that contact would be scheduled through a shared calendar until the court could establish a schedule. I did not raise my voice. The room would have felt the temperature change if I had. My mother inhaled sharply as if oxygen were an apology owed to her. Bianca laughed and called me cruel. Gabe said my name and then failed to find another word to put after it. I kept my gaze steady. I told them I had already spoken with a lawyer about temporary orders. I told them I had alerted our bank to flag unusual transfers and to require both signatures for any movement above a number that made rent look modest. I told them that I would be filing for separation and for financial restraining orders, and for a constructive trust on any funds that left our accounts for a purpose not tied to our child or our household. I told them the court would supervise a paternity test for any child Bianca would later claim belongs to my husband. The room discovered what gravity sounds like inside a house. Bianca stood as if she intended to pace, but remembered that pacing reads as guilt. She told my mother that I had always envied her. She told Gabe that she had been brave. She told me that the world does not respect women who cannot forgive. My mother nodded at nothing. Gabe asked if he could pack a bag. I told him I had already set aside the essentials and placed them by the door. He looked at the bag, the way a man looks at a boat that has a leak he does not know how to mend. He picked it up. He left without looking back. Bianca waited as if the house might form an apology out of drywall. Then she left too. My mother told me I was making a mistake and that family stories are written in pencil for a reason. I told her I prefer ink. I put our son to bed and he asked why people were loud. I told him grown-ups were practicing being brave and that the practice sometimes makes noise. He asked if the dinosaur could still come. I told him yes. I sat on the floor by his bed and counted my breath. I counted to 20 like the nurse had taught me after our last hospital ride for a fever that would not listen to medicine. Counting works. The waves receded. In the morning, I called the bank and completed the dual authorization settings for any transfer above a modest ceiling. I asked for text alerts on any charge above an amount that buys an easy dinner. I visited the branch and provided copies of the upcoming court filings so the bank could code our profile with the kind of caution that works quietly in the background. I moved the emergency fund to an account with my name only and left the household checking intact so bills do not turn into crises. I set my phone to save all notifications to a folder, and I named the folder the month and the year. Then I went to work and moved boxes and schedules and people into alignment because nothing about my job had changed even though my home now sounded like a ship turning. Asha is the lawyer I hired because I like women who write like carpenters. She met me in a small conference room with a view of fire escapes that zigzag in neat logic. She asked me to tell the story without adjectives. I told her the party and the announcement and the look at Gabe and the envelope and the hotel receipt and the doorbell camera and the letter from the urologist and my mother and the way Bianca always believed attention proves innocence. Asha listened and then described a plan the way a map describes a road you do not have to invent. Temporary orders to keep the roof over our heads. A request that Gabe not remove assets from accounts without mutual consent. A motion for a paternity test if Bianca claims the child is his. Discovery for Bianca that will request her medical timeline and any communications with Gabe. A petition for a constructive trust on any funds transferred to Bianca related to this pregnancy. She told me to keep my tone where it already was. Quiet and precise wins more than loud and true. I left her office with papers that smelled like a printing press and like the start of something stern. At home, I placed them in the top drawer of my desk and put a sticky tab on the edge so I could reach for the folder like a firefighter reaches for a hose. I called our pediatrician to schedule a checkup for our son because I wanted to keep the schedule of his life from catching fire. I rearranged the pantry so snacks sit at kid height like choices and not like bribes. I washed the cake knife by hand and put it back in the drawer and felt the steel go quiet. Bianca sent a series of messages. She explained how love sometimes arrives in bad packaging. She accused me of inviting lawyers to the table before the family had a chance to forgive. She suggested that a kind woman would wait until the baby was born to make trouble. She hinted that my career in operations had made me inhuman. She told me to think about holidays and about growing old and about how empty a house can sound when pride is the only furniture left. I read the messages like invoices that do not match delivered goods. I saved them. I did not reply. She called my mother. My mother called me and said a version of the speech I expected. She asked me to take the high road and to remember that blood should matter more than rules. I told her that blood is why rules exist. I asked her to stop calling until she could speak to me like an adult who understands that budgets can be moral documents. She hung up without saying goodbye. That is a family tradition in our house. Gabe texted to ask about seeing our son. I told him he could pick him up after school on Wednesday and have dinner and bring him back by 7:30. I told him we would put every plan in writing and I would confirm each plan by text. I told him I would be polite and brief because that is the safest way to be kind. He agreed. He asked if I would meet him to talk. I said we would speak in a room with a mediator when the court scheduled one. He sent a sad face made of punctuation. I set my phone face down and tied my hair back and went to the sink to wash dishes, because water resets the nervous system if you let it. The week became a study in the physics of restraint. I woke early and ran before dawn and counted steps over the bridge until the sky admitted it would be blue. I packed lunches. I made lists. I filed receipts. I scanned the hotel slip and the doorbell still and the urologist letter and sent them to Asha. I compiled a timeline that would make a judge breathe easy. I kept my voice low even in my own kitchen to teach my throat that raised volume is not proof. When I needed to yell, I went to the car and parked by the park and let a sound out of my chest that only the steering wheel had to hear. Then I took a breath and called the bank to check on alerts and walked into daycare with a smile bright enough to light a hallway. Asha filed the motions and the court clerk stamped them. We served Gabe at his office because nothing announces the arrival of consequences like a receptionist quietly saying your name and handing you an envelope. Bianca was served at the studio where she manages events. The process server reported that she took the paper like a person grabbing a wrong order. He wrote that she said to tell me, "This will not work." I read that line and felt relief. People who believe they are immune to gravity always mistake paper for wind. They never notice the stamp until it becomes a door. Gabe tried to move money through a series of small transfers to a new account with a name that looked like a consulting firm invented by a late night. The bank tripped on the pattern and called me. I confirmed that the transfers violated the spirit of the orders we had requested. The bank reversed the movements and flagged the new account. The fraud department sent a polite note that sounded like a hand, gently but firmly closing a window. I thanked the woman who had called me and wrote down her name in my folder because people who perform competence deserve to be remembered. Bianca posted a photo of a hand on a coffee cup with a caption about new life. The ring on the finger in the photo was not her usual ring. The location tag placed her near the hotel from the receipt. I took a screenshot, wrote the time, and filed it. I do not enjoy surveillance. I prefer truth to confession because truth does not depend on kindness. But when a person insists on making a stage out of your home, you are allowed to turn on the house lights and take notes. I took them. I went back to my life. Our son asked one night why Uncle Gabe was sad. He still calls Gabe Uncle sometimes as a joke from when we taught him not to call adults by first names. The joke stuck around like a guest who forgot to leave. I told him that big people sometimes forget how to share, and that when they forget, the whole house can feel it. He nodded with the seriousness children reserve for weather and birthdays. He asked if he could sleep with the dinosaur pillow because it helped dreams walk in a straight line. I said yes. We washed his face and brushed teeth and read the book about a rabbit that teaches counting backward. He counted with me from 50 to 1 and fell asleep before we found the end. The first hearing landed on a Wednesday afternoon when rain had decided to move in without folding itself neatly. The courtroom had a hiss like an old radiator, and the judge wore patience like a coat. Asha presented our request for temporary orders and financial restraints. She laid out the timeline with the authority of dates that do not care about feelings. She spoke about the doctor letter and the receipt and the ring camera and the Instagram tags without calling anyone names. Gabe sat with a lawyer whose tie looked nervous. Bianca appeared as an interested party. She wore a sweater that suggested humility and eyes that argued otherwise. The judge granted the orders. The judge scheduled a paternity test to be conducted under chain of custody if Bianca insists on claiming Gabe as the father. The judge reminded everyone that social media is not an appropriate venue for legal arguments. The judge asked us to consider the child, and I nodded so hard I felt something in my neck say thank you. After the hearing, my mother waited for me in the hallway with a face arranged for mourning. She told me I had broken the family. I told her the family had been cracked before, and I had simply turned on a light to see the fault lines. She told me blood will tell. I told her paper will tell first, and paper does not lie to protect the loudest person. She told me I was cold. I told her I was steady. She left with the stiff walk of someone who hates being denied the role of savior. Gabe began to attend a support group recommended by Human Resources. He sent me a message saying he wanted to change. I replied that change is proven, not promised. He asked if he could come to the house to fix the loose cabinet door. I told him I'd already fixed it with a $5 screw and a mean little screwdriver. He sent a pause and a thank you. I let that be the entire conversation. Compassion is not the same as trusting someone with your kitchen. Bianca tried a new tactic. She sent me a long message where she described a lonely adolescence and a sister who always won gold stars for organization. She painted herself into the corner of a painting titled Misunderstood. She ended by asking me to bless her new family and to stop shaming her in court. I read the message and imagined the gallery opening. I pictured the canapes and the fake laughter and the photos posted later by people who love being near power without having to hold it. I saved the message. I did not reply. I made dinner and sat with my son while he drew a train that stretched across 4 pieces of paper, taped carefully along the edge of the table. He told me the train was long because long things are strong. I told him he was right. The paternity test date arrived. Bianca changed her mind at the last minute and sent a message through her lawyer stating that she would pursue private confirmation. Asha responded with the sentence that always makes liars frown. The court prefers chain of custody performed through its approved providers. Bianca skipped the appointment anyway. The court noted her absence and rescheduled with the reminder that non-attendance would be treated as information. Gabe went and offered his sample and looked like a man who understands that he cannot outrun numbers. He left the clinic and sat in his car and sent me a message that said simply, "I am sorry." I set the phone down and did not reply because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is not feed their hunger for absolution. HR from Gabe's company reached out asking whether there were any orders restricting travel or access. I confirmed the existing orders and sent them the hearing summary with permission from Asha. HR thanked me in the cool language of people who have seen worse and know how to keep roofs attached during high winds. They set boundaries that made sense. Gabe received a performance plan written not for punishment, but for sobriety. He had to prove not just punctuality, but ethics. I watched from my side of the river and kept my child on my side of the bridge. Bianca held a small gathering at a friend's loft to celebrate her news. I did not attend. Photos arrived through the same careless channels, all modern life uses. She posed with a man I did not recognize. His hand rested on her lower back as if his palm had been taught to live there by repetition. A friend captioned a picture with a phrase that included the name of the town printed at the top of the hotel receipt in my folder. The man wore a watch that reflected light, like vanity. I saved the photo. I drew no conclusion. I let the eventual test and the court handle conclusions because that is their job, and I have learned to stop doing other people's jobs for them. At night after my son slept, I created a list of the things in my control. I can keep a schedule. I can keep documents. I can keep my voice. I can keep our home clean and warm and quiet. I can keep the bank from hemorrhaging. I can keep the court informed. I can keep my child from watching adults audition for a tragedy. I cannot control what Bianca does with her spotlight or where Gabe places his apologies. I cannot control my mother's story about duty. I wrote this and felt the list settle into my shoulders like a coat that finally fits. Weeks turned into a river that knew its path. The court moved with its own patience and then sometimes with a hurry that made me appreciate the people who choose this work. We attended mediation. The mediator had the kind of eyes that have memorized 1,000 endings and still believe in gentle starts. Bianca did not attend the first session. She sent a letter through her lawyer accusing me of cruelty for continuing the paternity process. The mediator shrugged in the careful way professionals avoid editorializing. Gabe sat across from me and tried to sell a future where he floats between our home and a co-parenting arrangement that requires trust he had misplaced. Asha negotiated like a person arranging bridge spans across a gorge. She stacked facts. She kept her voice even. She asked for temporary possession of the house for me and stability for our son. She asked for child support calculated without magic. She asked for a ban on transferring funds to Bianca for any pregnancy-related expense until paternity is confirmed by the court process, the mediator wrote. Gabe signed his name like a man learning his letters all over again. A month later, Bianca sent a message to the family chat announcing that she was engaged. The photo showed the same man from the loft party kneeling in front of her in a park with cherry blossoms. My mother responded with a string of hearts. An aunt wrote that love is stubborn. I wrote nothing. I called Asha and forwarded the photo for the file. I made dinner and remembered to salt the pasta water until it tasted like the sea, because kindness deserves to be practiced even when you cook alone. The paternity results arrived under the strict choreography of the labs that teach the world to love, chain of custody. The envelope opened to a sentence that made the room feel taller. Gabe was excluded as the biological father. Asha sent the result to the court. We filed an amended request that any financial claim related to the pregnancy be directed to the appropriate party and not my household. We asked for clarity on property division and for a final mediation date. The judge signed orders that translated science into law. Bianca did not call me. My mother did. She told me that families survive worse. I told her that survival is not the same as pretending. She hung up without goodbye. I put my phone face down and read my son a book where a small ship learns to trust its compass. When the final mediation came, we sat in a room where the air believed in professionals. Asha laid out what remained: division of accounts, a schedule for our son, an agreement that prevents future claims against my earnings for debts Gabe accrued while trying to become a different man. Gabe looked smaller and somehow more honest. He asked for time with his child and money to move to an apartment nearby. We arranged both in numbers that respected math and not nostalgia. We signed with pens that have seen more truth than most churches. We left quietly. Outside the building, the sky had the hard blue that comes after storm. I felt tired clean. There was no grand ending, no applause, no public shaming that would entertain the neighbors. The revenge, if that is the word people prefer, did not live in spectacle. It lived in paper and patience, and the kind of discipline that makes courts smile and banks nod and children fall asleep with a dinosaur pillow under their cheek. I did not burn a thing. I turned off the gas and opened windows and let the story clear itself out. Months later, my mother stopped by with a bag of fruit and an apology that made a sound like dust leaving a windowsill. She said she had mistaken noise for truth. She said Bianca had always been loud and that volume is hereditary in our family. She said she was proud of me for keeping the roof on. I poured her water and we sat at the table and ate pears. She cried a little. I did not. There is a dryness that arrives after a certain amount of weather. It is not unkind. It is the way wood remembers how to be strong. Gabe shows up on schedule. He reads books at bedtime on his nights. He pays support like a person who understands that money is not love, but it buys heat and rent and oranges and crayons. Bianca posts photos with her new husband and a baby whose smiles do not belong to me, and I wish them health and hold my boundary like a fence you paint twice a year without complaint. My son grows taller and asks better questions. He does not ask about the party announcement anymore. He asks whether magnets love metal and whether whales dream. I Google and I invent, and I steer him back to wonder when the answer is not strong enough to stand alone. On the anniversary of the party, I woke early and drove to the harbor and watched the ferries push the cold out of the water. I stood with my hands in my pockets and let the air braid my hair into a small mess that felt like a crown earned in a quiet war. I thought about Bianca and about the girl we used to be building blanket forts and assigning parts in our invented plays. I thought about Gabe and about the first year when we believed a budget and a bed and a calendar would be enough. I thought about my mother and about the way she learned to love the idea of our family so much that she forgot to notice its people. I let the thoughts form and then dissolve. I did not carry them home. At home, I baked a cake that tasted like lemon and steadiness. I iced it with a knife that now feels like an ally instead of a question. I set the table for my son and his friends, and we sang and we cut slices, and we sent children home, sticky and bright. No announcements were made, no spoons were tapped, no room turned into a theater. When the last guest left, I swept the floor and tied up trash and leaned against the counter until my feet forgave me. I looked at the wall where a calendar holds our days in squares. The squares did not contain drama. They held soccer and dentist and playdate and library. Ordinary is the throne where peace sits. If you ask me what I revealed that day at the party, the answer is not a single secret. I revealed that a plan can be louder than the person who wrote it. I revealed that numbers will hold you when people try to drop you. I revealed that quiet discipline outperforms noisy audacity every time the judge has a stamp and a line of cases to consult. I revealed that a mother can defend a home without turning it into a battlefield. I revealed that love for a child can be the North Star that navigates you past reefs built from other people's vanity. That is enough revelation for a lifetime. Life after the storm is both simpler and sharper. I wake early and run and stretch and make coffee that tastes like resilience. I drop my son at school and wave at the teacher who knows the names of storms and the names of constellations that children love to draw. I go to work and build schedules that make grown-ups arrive where they said they would arrive. I eat lunch at my desk and call it fuel. I reply to emails and call that diplomacy. I stand up and fix the slant in a poster on the wall and call it beauty. I come home and cook and we eat and we talk about nothing and everything. We clean the kitchen and we read and we sleep. It is not a fairy tale. It is a well-maintained road. It leads to good places. On some nights, I sit with the folder that holds the papers that kept the roof in place. I do not read them. I touch the edge of the stack and remember the sound of the stamp on the day the court turned my life from weather into architecture. I put the folder back. I do not need the weight every night. I need only to remember that order exists and that I can call it by name and it will answer. That is the lesson I want my son to inherit. Not rage, not pride, structure, calm. The willingness to write things down and keep the promises you write. Boston keeps turning. The harbor keeps breathing. The museum hosts more parties and more children blow out candles and make wishes that are sometimes about dinosaurs and sometimes about nothing they can name. Somewhere Bianca taps a spoon and expects a room to go quiet. Somewhere a man lifts a child in a room he calls home, and the light is kind on both of them. Somewhere, a mother sits with a folder and breathes with relief. Somewhere a judge flips a page and grants an order that changes a year. Somewhere a bank clerk stamps a form with care. Somewhere a woman like me washes a cake knife and puts it back in the drawer and feels the steel return to stillness. The world is kinder than it looks when you learn to measure it with the right tools. I cannot tell you how many times I was tempted to make a scene. A scream contains its own sugar and its own crash. But I chose another substance. I chose minutes and proofs and logs and receipts. I chose a tone that made clerks lean forward and judges let me finish. I chose to deny the room the spectacle it desired. At the party, I decided to hold the microphone by its cord and let gravity tuck it onto the floor. No speech, no apology for anyone who enjoys shock. Only a small smile and a line drawn by a hand that does not shake anymore. By the time summer arrives, our life has the hum of a refrigerator that works. No one praises it. Everyone benefits. My son learns to swim with his face in the water and later announces that he can breathe like a fish if he remembers to turn his head at the right times. I think about that line when I sit at my desk after bedtime and write the next week's shopping list. Breathe. Turn at the right times. Do not fight the water. Let it hold you while you move through it with intention. That is how I survived the party. That is how I survived the month after. That is how I will teach my son to survive whatever comes next. There will be other announcements in my life. Some will be surprises brought by joy. Some will be surprises thrown like stones. When they arrive, I will set them on the table and ask them to prove themselves with dates and forms and witnesses. If they cannot, I will sweep them into the bin with the frosting scraps and the ribbon the cat tried to eat when no one looked. If they can, I will make room for them in the folder, and I will adjust the calendar, and I will cook something that feeds whoever needs feeding that day. This is adulthood. It is less a finish line and more a kitchen. I see Bianca sometimes on the street or in a photo. We nod. She wears a life that fits her, and I am not its tailor. I wish her health in my mind, and then I go back to my side of the street. Gabe arrives on time and leaves on time and hands back the lunchbox rinsed and the library book unbent. He smiles at our son in a way that does not ask for pity, and I respect that. We run on a calendar now. It is not romance. It is transportation. It gets us from here to where our child needs to be, and that is a miracle large enough to live with. If you ask me for advice, I would give you a list. Write down times. Name files clearly. Save screenshots with dates. Do not argue in front of children. Pick water over wine during strategy. Call the bank before you call your sister. Choose a lawyer who speaks like a builder. Memorize the names of clerks. Ask for copies. Freeze what can be frozen. Cancel what can be canceled. Keep receipts. Keep your voice. Keep your home warm. Keep moving. One day you will wake up and realize the storm is no longer in the room. It is outside. You can hear it. You do not have to invite it in. The day after the party that started this, I sat at the kitchen table after everyone slept and watched the streetlight paint the window frame a soft silver. The envelope with the doctor's letter lay on the table like a small ship that had brought me across. I thought about the moment Bianca tapped her spoon. I thought about the way the room tilted toward her. I thought about how quiet I stayed. That quiet was a muscle I had built without knowing. It held. It will hold again. That is my revelation. That is my revenge. That is my life now. Quiet as a ledger, strong as a stamped order, bright as a birthday candle in a room full of children who deserve adults they can trust. Spring pushed salt air through the harbor streets, and the city learned to smell clean again. I walked to the market with my son and let him name the colors of fruit like he owned the spectrum. We came home with lemons and bread and a small pie the baker insists on making for children, who answer his questions with courage. The house opened like a polite book. I set the table and felt the room remember what it was built to do. The orders became a floor. The bank kept its line straight. The court did not ask for applause, and that was the gift. Our calendar turned into squares that meant real things. Library, dentist, practice. Nothing in those boxes asked the past to explain itself. The boxes asked only for decent shoes and pens that write when called. Bianca moved through her own new orbit with the shine she prefers. I let her. The day she sends a photo to the family chat, I save it and do not invent a caption. My mother learns to speak to me in the language of facts. We do not relitigate a room full of cake and strangers. We talk about pears at the market and whether the ferry line runs smoother this season. Gabe keeps the schedule he agreed to. He arrives on time and leaves on time and drops off a lunchbox that does not smell like effort spoiled. He pays what the orders say and the bank nods. On good weeks, he writes a note about a book he read with our son, and I file it in a folder that has no need to grow dramatic in order to be important. I measure change by who honors a plan when no one is watching. Work returns to the familiar rhythm that kept me sane when rooms tried to audition for tragedy. I line up shipments. I negotiate with weather. I make a board of names and due dates, and the board learns my handwriting again. The company trusts me with routes that only behave for patient minds. I like that kind of trust. It does not flirt. It shows up and does its job. On a Saturday, we visit the museum again. My son runs straight to the water table and sets the small boats in motion with a seriousness that would make a judge smile. He asks if the boats can carry wishes. I tell him every boat can carry something if you balance it right. He nods like a foreman approving a beam. Balance will be his inheritance, and I am proud of that. Messages still arrive some nights with the last light. Old friends want gossip the way people crave sugar after a hard day. I give them weather. I give them recipes. I give them schedules. I do not give them the old heat. Heat grows the wrong crops. I am a farmer now. I plant steadiness and I harvest quiet. When rain threads itself across the harbor, I make soup and teach patience to the pot. I slice lemons and watch the rind shine. I read while the broth learns its work, and my son draws trains that look like progress made visible. We line the drawings along the wall and the room grows longer. We do not need more square feet. We need better stories inside the feet we already pay for. The final papers arrive with clean stamps and tidy lines. I scan and file and then set the envelopes under a book so the pages will flatten. For a minute, I let my hand rest on the stack, and I say, thank you to the idea that paper can carry a life from weather to architecture. Then I put the folder away. The drawer closes without sticking, and that feels like a blessing earned with small, honest work. If you ask what I revealed at the party, I will say that I revealed a different way to carry anger. I carried it into a room with rules and let it be measured by someone who understands gravity. I carried it into a bank and asked numbers to tell the truth. I carried it into a kitchen and taught it to stir without burning. Revenge is a word people love when they want fireworks. Repair is the word I choose when I want a roof. We celebrate my son's next birthday at the park near the water where the wind plays the flags like an instrument, and mothers pretend not to cry at small acts of courage. No one taps a spoon. No one auditions for legend. We light candles and we clap once he has blown them out, and then we wipe frosting off cheeks and call cabs and pack bags and go home. The day ends on time. The night arrives without subplots. Later, I stand at the sink and watch the window hold a piece of sky the size of a book cover. The glass is clean because I decided it would be clean. The house breathes in a key I could hum if someone asked. I turn off the light and the room agrees that we have done enough for today. Tomorrow will come with another list. I will pick it up and carry it. That is the work. That is the life I claimed back from noise.